Welcome, everybody. I'm Andy Crestodina from Orbit Media Studios, and you are here live with us now in real time for another Semrush webinar. I know this is happening, and I'm really excited because despite all the things happening in the world, we're going to take a break from 24-hour nonstop news media coverage, take a deep breath, step back and focus back on our content, focus back on our strategy, on our marketing, and we've got a great person to talk to about that today, which is Robert Rose. Robert, you all should know the name. I'm not sure where you've been if you don't know the name. If you don't yet, this is an amazing opportunity to introduce yourself, familiarize yourself with a man who knows content strategy intimately. It's in his blood. We are talking decades. I'm going to say you've got like 20 years of digital strategy, right?
I mean, yes, you can see it. You can see it written all over my face. It's, I have the gray hair and the wrinkles to prove it. Yeah, indeed. Content's a tough business, kid.
Yeah, I know. I'm with you. I'm that same generation. We're like the Gen X kids who started in early, right in 2000. So welcome everyone. We're thrilled to see someone from Estonia. Friends from all over the world. Of course, we have a global audience here. Feel free to let us know where you're from. South Florida. Ted, welcome. So Robert Rose is very closely aligned with the Brand of Content Marketing Institute, where he's led research and coverage on topics of the day, news. He actually. Their content strategy is fascinating. He may tell us a bit about, but has evolved into an expert, well-known speaker, someone who's on the speaking circuit and writing circuit, and consultant for teams. Specifically, we're talking about teams today. There's a lot of us who are part of sort of micro teams, sort of onesie twosies, but Robert's going to help us from smaller teams see the future, how we will grow, the things we need to have in place when we grow. And for anybody who's collaborating with more than 2-3 people, like what the frameworks are, what the structures are. He and I both work together on some very large brands with some really interesting challenges. But he's going to break it down for us. Without further ado, Robert, share with me and the Semrush audience your approach to talking to your clients day in and day out about working on teams.
Yeah, so it's where we spend most of our time, quite frankly, because you said it well when you talked about the idea that many of us are in, teams of 1, teams of 2, but that doesn't necessarily even indicate company size, right? We know some of the biggest brands in the world where the content team is 1 or 2 people. So it comes from everything from whether you're a solopreneur out there, facing the world, and especially in these days. And we are going to save a little time to talk about maybe at the end of the show about, what it's like to talk in this world and what's going on in the world today. But the key is whether you're a team of 1, a team of 5, or a team of, 100, how do you start to structure so that you can actually scale? The 2 questions that we get all the time in content is, how do I scale this thing? In other words, how do I do more, basically? And then 2, how do I actually measure this thing? And so, this is something you're seeing too, yes, Andy?
Yes. Yeah. It's a common question. It's a big problem. People ask me this a lot. It's like, at what point should I try to get buy-in? Am I talking about the right thing? They're not really taking my input very well, or I'm not getting answers, like silos. These are the words that, if you hear these words, you know that you're on the right webinar today. Silos, on the same page, alignment.
Yep.
Right? These are things that indicate that we need some input from Robert. But I'm glad you mentioned coronavirus, because at the end of this conversation, we are going to address that. But yeah, these are the team challenge. This reminds me of a quote I heard. This was Ann Handley at a Marketing Profs event. She said, getting buy-in from your team is not a giant obstacle to your job. It's your job.
Yeah. Boy, isn't that the truth? Yeah, it's the same thing. When we go into any client, and again, it really is independent of how big they are or how big the team is. Whenever I hear the complaints of, well, we're an on-demand vending machine of content to the sales team, or we don't really have a content strategy, or our editorial calendar isn't really a calendar. It's more just a to-do list of all the stuff that we have to do that's been assigned to us. So our SEO is really struggling right now because we don't have the time to put into the pre-work and all the metadata and everything we want to put into the content. We're too busy trying to churn stuff out. Whenever you hear those things, what ends up happening is, and it immediately tells me that we're imbalanced, right? We have an imbalanced operating model for our team, for the structure. I'll tell you what, let me share a couple of slides here that might help here in terms of what we're seeing out in the marketplace. And so I'll just share that and hit play. And hopefully that came across okay. Does that look okay, Andy?
Looks good.
Okay, fantastic. Well, it starts with something that for many of you in the audience you might be familiar with, which is this saying called "Don't ship the org chart." And it was made famous by a guy by the name of Steven Sinofsky, who at the time, this was going back now 10 years ago, he framed this up. And basically what he was saying is that, when you're communicating, whether you're developing a product, whether you're looking at communicating, building a website, building a content strategy, whatever it is, don't communicate in the same way that you're organized. And we still see this today, right? We still see it, in the way websites are developed and the way that we develop products. And it is reflective rather of the way that we're organized, rather than how we want to be customer centric or how we want to be more audience centric in the way that we communicate. We still have websites where there's a section called products, separated out by the different product groups rather than by how customers actually think about them. Because why? Well, we're separated that way internally by team. We have a separate section called news or PR because, of course, that's where they manage. And we have a separate area of the website for bios and for our brand and where the brand people manage. And we've segmented this off into those silos. And it's in many ways the way that we sort of institutionally communicate. But the interesting thing, of course, is that he wasn't actually issuing a warning. He wasn't saying, don't do that. He was saying, no, it's inevitable. You're going to do that. You're going to ship the org chart. However you communicate will reflect the way that you're organized. And basically, that's the way you're going to talk. And of course, that is something that represents a guy by the name of Melvin Conway, who created in the 1960s a thing called Conway's Law, which was basically in a very complex way. He basically said, look, organizational design is the way you're going to create communications or your product. Organizational design is product design. You will speak in the way that your team is organized. And so when we think about it,
what's that? It's like automatic. It's inevitable. It's because it's just.
It is inevitable.
It's just reality.
You will. Basically, what we come down to is it how well you communicate as a business, how well you create content, how well content operates is in direct correlation with the balance and the importance you put on the strategy of it. In other words, the more strategy and forethought and thinking that you put into the balance of your team's exercise, what they do for a living, the way it's going to actually work. That's the way you will communicate. And so in so many ways, the business doesn't do that, right? We throw crap against the wall and we hope some of it sticks and a lot of it doesn't.
That's a little bit counterintuitive. So you're saying that to improve the messaging, to improve the connection of our content with our audience, we need to first look at how we are structured, improve the organization's streamlines, efficiencies, balance, and that will cause improved marketing as a result. It's sort of like not trying to change the content. It's first looking at ourselves.
Right. You know what I mean? It's the change starts from within, or however you want to, whatever spiritual metaphor you like.
Man in the mirror. I'm hearing like a MJ song.
Exactly. But it's true. We've just watched it happen over the last decade, which is you can't really change the way that you communicate and use content until you actually operate in a way that is balanced against what it is you're trying to say. And so the way we sort of have framed that, because, so great. Now we're a team, right? It's not just me. It's not just the man or woman in the mirror. It's our whole team. It's our whole org structure. The key is, when we hear those complaints, we're siloed. We're struggling to scale. We can't measure this thing. We're trying to get the SEO. What it tells me And what we have to start making a business case for in our, no matter how big or how small, I do this and we're a team of 5 in our company. And I've seen teams of, 50, 100, 200 actually approach this, is we have to get what we call the right operating model balance. And so when we look, I'll quickly go through these 4, and then maybe we can have a discussion about them and drill a little deeper into them. Basically, what we see out there is sort of 2 axes of where your focus is, like what is the purpose of content, right, in the business. And so when we look at it across the lower axis there, we say, okay, is it just a siloed service? In other words, is it just meant to be a small little component of managing the website or managing this or managing the blog or managing something? Yes, it may be. Then all the way to the right, it may be focused on an integrated business service where we're basically servicing the entire organization. And again, if we're a team of 1, it may be an integrated business service because we're basically one person trying to do it all. Or if we're a team of 2, we actually may just be servicing assets to the business, right? It may be, Bill and Margaret, the 2 colleagues who are doing infographics and white papers and blog posts and one sheets and PowerPoints and speeches and all that for the rest of the marketing team. And so if you then move up the axis on the left, you get to, is it an internally focused group? In other words, am I only merchandising content assets to the rest of the business internally? Or am I focused on an external platform that actually focuses in on building audiences externally, right? So monetizing audiences. And so if we look at each one of these in turn, right? So as I mentioned, you've got this player model, which is really where content is a contributor to the business. This is where most people, quite frankly, start. There's a couple of people, maybe a handful, maybe 1. And our job is basically to build assets, a content factory in many cases it's called, where we're assets. And then you have what we call the processor model. Now, anybody who's in technology or SEO will be familiar with this. This is where we may not be focused on creating content. We may be focused on optimizing content for the business. SEO, taxonomy, translation, localization, CMS templates, structuring content, persona development, where content itself becomes a service as a standard, sort of protocols, guidelines, the sort of creation of common ways to manage and orient content as a tool or an asset in the business. And then you've got the performer model, which is where we start to see content as a product. So this is where we have a resource center or a publication or a blog or our content hub, and where our focus is a team that's building audiences. And that team that's building audiences is focused on an editorial strategy where they're looking out and focusing on building that product, that resource center, that magazine, that blog, that event as its own entity, as its own content strategy. And then maybe a bridge too far for many on this call, but certainly not relegated to company size, would be content as a platform, as a business itself. This is what my pal Joe Polizzi and I wrote about in our last book, Killing Marketing, which is where the content becomes a business model in and of itself, right? So the famous, probably most famous of all of these is the Red Bull Media House, where content makes money for the organization, but is also one of their main marketing arms. Salesforce's Dreamforce is another great example of this. The content itself is a profitable part, or could be a profitable part, of their business model. So the immediate inclination is to say, okay, great, which one of these do we want to be? No, it's not a maturity model. It's not something that you sort of go and move from one to the other and ultimately reach the ultimate pinnacle of the upper right in the platform. The key is not, although you will probably balance across all of these, the key is how do we balance ourselves across these things so that we're servicing the business in the right way. Every business will have at some point, or should have at some point, elements of each of these models. But when we hear that there's trouble, can't measure, can't scale, siloed, trying to meet the demands, what it tells me is that there's an imbalance. The most common one that I hear is where they're squarely in the player model. It's Bill and Margaret trying to supply so many assets to the business, and they just can't keep up. And then somebody goes, you should build a blog or a content hub, or we should have a resource center.
Yeah.
And they go, Yeah, that would be real nice, but we don't even have time to do that.
Yeah.
Or they just start throwing stuff into that resource center as they create stuff with no strategy behind it. So they're trying to balance that performer content as product model, but they can't take a strategic approach to it because they're just too busy. They don't have the balance of the operating model because they are different. Each one is measured differently. Each one has a different team structure. Each one has a different cadence and workflow. And so that's the real key, is focusing in on how do we build a business case to perform each one of them, no matter how big our team size is. So should we build, for example, a standards-based model? So my friend Carlos Abler, who was at 3M for a number of years, this was his focus, right? He built his team around focusing in 60% of their time trying to create standards, SEO guidelines, operational guidelines, training, best practices, protocols across the business for how content would be managed. Because he knew there was no way he was going to be able to rein in all of those different product groups and industries and regionals. But what he could do is he could actually create a strategy that at least had everybody doing it in the same way. So he was focused in on providing value that way. Or it might be a publishing focused mix where we have somebody like, Symantec, who really transformed their blogging, their content hub strategy from just a pile of assets out on the website to 4 distinct publications focused in on separate audiences, where they really built the performer model focus. And then, of course, yes, also supply assets to the business at 25% of their time. And then they have a processor where they're focused on SEO, et cetera, et cetera. So finding the right one for you, whether you're a team of 1 or a team of 100, is the first step to figuring out how to balance your team and your structure. So I'll stop there maybe, and we can have a little discussion about some of that.
It's really interesting. I don't think I've thought about it this way. It's not likely that most of our attendees have thought about it this way. If I had to guess, I think that there's a pretty sophisticated audience for this webinar, and that a lot of people are in the bottom right quadrant, where they have systems, they have standards, there's content, there's strategists involved. They're not just. A lot of people here have gone beyond the keyword first. It's a search biased group, an SEO from way back. They've gone beyond just the keyword first strategy. Let's just get traffic to thinking about the audience and thinking about strategy, thinking about the content first and then keyword alignment. It's rare, and it's taken a pounding right now. The top right quadrant, of course, it's difficult to monetize content if you don't have a live event strategy. I think that was one of the go-to ways. And not likely a common approach for people that we have here as attendees. But so I'm interested in the balance between. The balance between, what was it, bottom right? That's the performer. And
you've got the processor in the lower right, and then the player in the lower left. So
processor and performer, right? That's the. They're both. The word strategy was in both of those. So the top right, it's not. So you're running programs. You've got a plan. You're producing. Yes, you've got a webinar, and you know how you're going to repurpose that in other formats of content, and it's going to get promoted over here, and you've got channels that connect. The dots connect. In your experience, where is the most common gap for not the Symantecs, but the smaller teams, the more the mid, the teams with 3 or 5 people, the $10 to $50 million business?
Yeah. So the biggest gap is that they don't. What they look at is content is kind of everybody's job and nobody's strategy, right? And so many of those people that are really smart, talented people lie in that lower right-hand side where, okay, we're just going to sort of give it up that sales guys are going to create content, the C-suite's going to create content, marketing people are going to create content, web team is going to create content, they got agencies creating content. And to the best of our ability, we're going to try and offer up our services as the understanding the SEO, understanding how to optimize as best we can. And that just doesn't fly over time, right? Anybody who's out there in the audience right now who's feeling frustrated by that knows what I'm talking about, right? Which is they don't listen, they won't comply, They won't, they don't do what we tell them to do. And so we get into these sort of, quasi arguments about how it is that we should be optimizing this thing. And so that gap between where our content strategy is going and where it currently is from a content production standpoint is the most common gap. And then you say, well, great. Well, how do I, as a SEO guy or a gal focused on, figuring out how I'm going to, create templates in the CMS and the translation and the taxonomy and the keyword strategies, how am I going to fix that? Well, the key is that leadership has to come typically from wherever we are, right? And so the leadership there is to say, listen, what we're trying to do, if we're squarely in the processor model, what we're trying to do, and our expertise as a team or my expertise as an individual, is to get our arms around the structure of content. Because that's what we're talking about with SEO, really. SEO is about content structure. How do we structure it in a way that helps us optimize its distribution and viewability and all of the rest of the things that we're trying to do? And so taking that bigger strategy for what the model is and saying, I need permission, or I need to go just take responsibility for the overall structure, guidelines, protocols. Here's the training. Here's the best practices. If that's going to be the sort of anchor of our new operating model, let's take it. Let's build it. Let's build it enterprise wide so that we are a leading integrated business service. What that does is that and I've just watched it happen, is it frees up resources. Getting organized and better about content typically frees up resources, time for you to think about other things. And what those other things might be is to say, okay, now is the time for us to go look at marketing and say, hey, marketing, here's what we might do to help you evolve how you're actually producing these assets, how you're actually changing the workflow of those things. So I'll share one quick slide with you real quick.
Sure.
Just to sort of illustrate this idea here and share. And so if we look at this, right? So if this is our Bob and Margaret player structure, right? Which may be, hey, there's some senior leadership and we're in the content ops group, right? And so we're focused on SEO, we're focused on structure, we're focused on this. Great. And we've got some supporting technology, et cetera, et cetera. We may then be able to take a outreach, because right now what's happening with the other Bill and Margaret, our corollaries in marketing, they're just churning out content, right? They've just got demands everywhere in that player model, right? They got, people coming to them saying, hey, we need more content for this campaign in the first quarter, and we're churning out assets. Hey, we're churning out more assets over here for this webinar and for this ROI calculator and for this, a blog post that we want to write and social media. And hey, we're churning out content over here and we're building in this, white paper, and we're building in this email program. And hey, we're churning out content over here. They're a mess. And we can help them start to structure their processes, because that becomes our remit. Our remit as the structure-oriented processor model becomes, how do we help you build workflows, protocols, and standards that helps you optimize your workflow and production process better, so that we don't end up with a disconnected pile of assets, or as I like to say, assets coming out of our assets. We end up with a strategy where we start to build in the integration with other parts of the organization, whether it be marketing or PR or comms or sales enablement or wherever we are, and build a structured workflow and process that helps them evolve as well. And so we become the leader of structure and organization to our content strategy holistically, not just SEO folks.
Yeah, I think you end up with, ever heard the phrase HIPPO? The highest paid person's opinion.
Right.
Yeah,
that's right.
You could defend yourself from the HIPPO. So you're in a conference room, there's an executive who suddenly says, what are we doing on, Instagram, or what's our podcast, or where are we on Pinterest? Or they just start throwing out, they read an article somewhere and now they've got a big idea and they're pressuring their team to be active in a channel that's got nothing to do with their strategy. So I think if you have those things in place, that must help. I assume that would help them come back and say, well, I hear you, but let's go back and look at our strategy. our templates, our protocols, our audience, our personas. These tools end up becoming hippo defense or help people manage up to senior leaders in their own organizations.
It's exactly it, right? I mean, and of course, ultimately it becomes making the business case, right? How do we make a business case, again, whether we're in a small business, medium-sized business, or large business, to say, this is a good idea, right? In other words, this is a good idea. It's not just, I'll give you an example of this. So I had a conversation with a CFO, not a huge company, but a mid-sized company, but they are global in nature. So they have offices in Europe. They have offices here in North America. They have offices in Asia Pac. And so they have offices everywhere, but they're not a huge, giant organization. And he said to me, okay, we've got these teams and they're trying to put together this global content strategy for us. Why? Why do I care? Why do I care about, what's going on in Europe? Why do I care about how many they're producing in Asia Pac and the content that's getting produced there? And I asked him a simple question. I said, how much did you spend last year on content? And he kind of laughed at me. He kind of went, wait a minute, what do you mean? And I said, no, seriously. I'm sure you can tell me how much you spent on paid advertising. I'm sure it's classified very well. How much did you spend on content? And I mean all content. I mean internal comms, email content, white papers, blog posts, infographics,
presentations,
all that stuff, presentations. How much did you spend? And again, he laughed at me and said, that's impossible to know. And I said, it's not impossible to know, and you have to know it. I said, because I'll bet you it's one of, if not the biggest expense that you have in communications.
Yeah.
And so we did an exercise where we, and quite frankly, it was the SEO team as well as the CMS team. We basically did, we're not accountants, but we kind of did forensic accounting where we had them print out all of the expenditures in marketing. And we sort of went through and sort of reverse engineered all of the expenses and content. The fascinating thing was what's an ebook? What's an article? What's a blog post? What's a presentation? What's a project versus an initiative? All of those things they had no common nomenclature for, no common taxonomy, no structure for. So what Europe was spending maybe 15,000 euros for a white paper, and where Asia Pac was spending maybe $5,000, or yen for an ebook, there wasn't an apples to apples. It's like, you're spending way more money on this same kind of output over here than over there. And even just wrangling a common nomenclature around what they were calling content pieces gave them savings of millions of dollars every year, because quite frankly, they were just wasting money because it was being hidden in all of these costs. So structuring even just the nomenclature of what you call content, and that's arguably the job of the processor model, is to get our arms around what it is and how we're spending on assets that we're creating.
Yeah, I think that's it's a question. I mean, time is harder to manage and measure than money. Money's very easy to measure.
Yes.
Right. Money, you get a piece of paper in the mail that shows you how much money, that measures your money for you. Time is very difficult to measure. Service-based companies like ours, we have to track time, and we're very, serious about tracking time. For years, I don't do it lately, but for years I tracked time down to the quarter-hour increment. I don't think most people have a sense for what their content costs them.
No, they don't. And they don't have it. And more importantly, they don't really have a sense of what the commonalities between the two, right? So the savings, one of the biggest savings that came out of this sort of exercise that we did for this company was what they were spending on what they thought were sort of synonymous things, right? In other words, what is a blog post, right? What really, what is it? What is a blog post? Is it, is it a 2,500 word with images set of text written in a Microsoft Word document that ultimately gets published in a, and then there's time associated with the production, the SEOization, all of the stuff that we have to do to it that is time-based as well. How much does that cost us versus how much does a 2,500, word white paper cost us that we don't go through SEO on, that we don't do all of those things with? Or what does an email cost us? Or what does a social post cost us, or whatever? Now, to your point, do you need to go that granular? I don't know. You can make your own decision there. The point being is, if we get a common structure, a way that we define the standards of the way that we communicate, and arguably us as content strategists should be responsible for that, we can take a leadership position in the organization to say, we can not only help you optimize the activation and distribution of your content, we can actually help activate the better way and more efficient way to create, manage, and produce the content as well.
I'm just gonna just bear with me for a mini thought experiment. You and I are executives in a mid-sized company, and we just decided to measure the actual cost of our content, and we're now looking at spreadsheets that show it. Examples of hypotheses and ideas we might have immediately. Wow, our marketing team is actually spending a huge amount of time making presentations for salespeople, doing just sales support. That'd be very likely outcome. Or wow, it might be more efficient for us to put paid dollars behind this piece of content than to have our team, run around in circles doing a ton of, outreach or social promotion for which we're getting very little traction. Paid dollars behind content, you don't see it enough, right? You and I have both seen the research that shows that there's value there. Another example might be, hey, based on how hard this content works for us, even though video is 10x the effort and cost, the results are 100x. We should really be doubling down on this format and pulling back from this other format.
Well, that's a huge one. Just to clear, that's a huge one, because so many times, and this happens big and small businesses, we create that amazing thought leadership, amazing white paper or article. We put it out there and it does great. And then 2 quarters later, it's completely forgotten about because we never revisited it. We never cared about it again. And so we go, oh, well, it was 2 quarters ago. Of course we don't ever do it again. Well, why not? Why haven't we revisited it or created a video out of it or created a webinar out of it? Or, there was a huge idea in that little article and we never explored it because we just sort of did it as part of our to-do list and never sort of revisited it again.
Yeah, a lot of stuff we should stop doing. We'd probably quickly conclude we should stop doing a bunch of these. 60% of the effort. No, what is it? That's what's the guy's name? It's the 80-20 rule.
Oh, you're thinking of Michael Porter, right? So the 5 forces of business strategy, and one of them is, what should we stop doing? Yeah.
Or I think 80% of results come from 20% of the effort.
Pareto's law. Yeah, Pareto's law.
That one. Yeah, both of these things. You end up. I think that it's, if nothing else, one thing we've just heard is a challenge to each of us to take steps toward measuring the cost of content production, promotion, and aligning that with the outcomes, and just having a truthful conversation with yourself, your team, about where your time is going. Got a question coming in from Jeannie Hill. I'm going to read this to you, Robert. Let's see what you think. How do you discuss delicate real content costs if team members are vying for the same budgets? Thanks, Kate, for putting that up.
Yes, great question, Jeannie. Fantastic question. And the real answer is, so it already tells me that if that's a real issue for you or your clients or whatever you're dealing with, there's a model imbalance there, right? Because if we're all fighting for the same budget, then something's wrong. I mean, I see this all the time where groups are competing with each other, where you've got the blog team that's competing with the thought leadership or sales enablement team for budget around building assets, because we're weirdly competing for the same audience. And that's a challenge. Now, one of the things that I certainly don't have good answers for you is the politics and the corporate culture for how that actually gets solved. Those are typically issues that go outside the bounds of strategy, right? So culture eats strategy for breakfast. What I can advise is that everybody needs to get together, and so changing up the operating model. And I'll actually let me show us a slide here that talks to exactly that.
This is a great question, Jeannie. Thanks for asking it.
Yeah, it's a great question.
What do you do when team members are vying for the same budget? Finite resources, territorial, defense, right? People trying to protect. It's the prioritization when you've got fixed resources, and unlimited demands. Oh, here we go.
So one of the things that I might suggest for you, Jeannie, is that you start to look at the planning and production process for content across all of the different groups, right? And again, I can't address the emotional or the politics or the sort of, if any of them are sort of not nice people or whatever. I can't address that part of it.
I think this could help with politics, but continue.
But it absolutely can. It can help with politics. So it's to say, can we rebalance what we're doing across all those different groups and say, all right, our production process, we want to shoot for maybe a 60%. And I know this is a bit of an eye chart. It's supposed to build, but I didn't want to try and do the builds here. But basically, on the left-hand side, can we get 60% of our efforts to be proactive? In other words, a proactive looking forward calendar, whether that's assets or blog posts for our product or whatever it happens to be. We're going to have SEO focus. We're going to have editorial ideas. We're going to have our target goals, etc. And then 40%, because we know we won't cover the whole thing, will be reactive. The business needs this. The CEO wants his video. All of those things. We have those things. All of that goes into a cross-functional group. Call it an editorial board. Call it a center of excellence. Call it whatever you like. And basically, that's where we're going to set our priorities. Because chances are, you all have similar needs, maybe not exact, but certainly similar needs that could be synergized around strategic projects. Those strategic projects then are the priorities that get created in a structured way, in the way that we can sort of break them apart to meet the needs of the social team, the other team, the blog team, the sales enablement team, my web team, etc. We have a shared calendar where we create all of these things and the production of them, et cetera, when they're going to be available. So yeah, the social team doesn't need that thing for 3 months. That's okay. Produce it now. Slow down the process and create more strategic big rock pieces of content that enables everybody's budget to go further. And out of that, in a, your typical production stamp, your plan, your build, your distribute, your manage, all of that, sort of standard production process. Out of that comes activations, so that everybody's getting their activated needs and you're leveraging a shared, not necessarily technically shared budget, but a joined process that meets everybody's needs. That's just one idea, right? So revisiting the operating model of how content is getting produced so that you can at least leverage what it is people are fighting about. Hopefully that's a little helpful.
Well, so something else kind of between the lines there for Jeannie is that you've got limited budgets. What you just described is a process for reducing waste.
That's right. That's exactly right. And so it can help, that editorial board can help settle disputes, hopefully, again, emotions and politics notwithstanding, but it can also help eliminate all of the reduplication. One of the things that I'll often tell clients when we start advising this kind of workflow is the pushback, and there will be pushback, will be, oh, that's going to slow things down. It's really going to, now I'm going to have to fill out a TPS report about what my content needs. And, I'm going to have to fill out this, and I'm going to have to meet with people and blah, blah, blah. I can't just start creating. Yes, all of those things are true. You will slow down the beginning of the process. But I promise you, if you just wait for it, what's going to happen is at the backside of that, when you've got all of these lovely, wonderful, structured assets in the DAM system, in the CMS system, in the shared file folder, and when somebody says, oh, I want that piece, but I want a different hero image with it, or I want that piece, but I want it in raw format, it's there. It's already there for you. You don't have to rebuild, reconstruct, recreate all of these assets from scratch. A classic example of this was we did some work with an insurance company, and quite frankly, the woman who runs the program there is a super smart woman. And she said to me one day, she said, if I have to see one more damn article on distracted driving in my CMS system, I'm going to kill somebody. They had 37 articles on distracted driving in their CMS system. Why? Because it was just simply easier for some marketing manager to go, oh, let's just hire a freelancer to write an article on distracted driving than it was to go search the CMS system for something they could reproduce. And so they could have literally saved themselves 35 iterations of distracted driving articles by simply just getting together and saying, here's a structured piece that can be broken up into multiple pieces, an article, a blog post, social post, infographic, whatever, on distracted driving, and that becomes the single source of the truth.
Boy, that just made it really real for me, because as an SEO, I just think about the huge lost opportunity of having 35 URLs that are all medium quality articles on the same topic.
Well, there's that too.
If you're doing search, if you're doing search,
God,
you want
don't even get me started on that part, because all those articles, by the way, are public, right? They're stuck on the website, they're stuck in the resource center, they're stuck on the blog, they're stuck in the PR newsroom, they're stuck everywhere, right?
Yeah, that's sometimes called keyword cannibalization. You've got a bunch of URLs that are all slightly relevant for the same topic, instead of having one URL that's an amazing URL on the topic.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is something, just side note for this audience, because we're a lot of SEOs here. You will often get way better results by going back and updating an old article than by publishing a new one. So if you've got an editorial board who has that conversation and says, wait, that is a good topic, but before you go make something new on that, let's go back and look. Do we have any URLs on our site that have link equity? Do we have any good answers, expert contributions? Do we have any videos or supportive assets on this? Build up one page to be the best page on your website. In fact, the best page on the internet for the topic, distracted driving. If you're going to write another article about it, let that be a guest post for another site that links back to your best page on the internet about distracted driving, for which you wouldn't use a freelancer. You need to coordinate with the team to have someone do some outreach, and maybe that person should be someone with a good profile with that publication. So yeah, I mean, if you're doing SEO, then that is a disaster to make a ton of articles, loosely related. They're not even probably internally linked, right?
Right. It's such a great point. And what it comes flooding back for me is it's just a great example of how the SEO's managers, director, the team's job is bigger than just making sure that it ranks high on Google. It's to structure content in a way that we don't have waste. Mm-hmm. And so beyond the SEO implications, which you just outlined beautifully, which are, so powerful, there's also a cost there.
Yeah.
That is, and again, that marketing manager may go, but it's just easier for me to do that. Yes, it's easier for you given our current org structure, but we're shipping the org chart, right? We're shipping our own ease in order to actually facilitate something that's bad ultimately for the customer, a bad experience for the customer. Because beyond being certainly wrong for SEO, and I've seen this too, that content can contradict each other sometimes, right? Because we're having some freelancer write it, or we have an agency writing it for us. And it can be sort of, all of a sudden you've got two pieces out there representing your voice on the topic, and they don't agree.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of metaphors. I'd like to go fishing. The easiest thing for me to do is to fish right here.
Exactly.
That's carpet. Hopefully. There's no water there. Just because it's easier. That is the worst criteria for decision making. What about promotion, or as you often in the books I've read of yours, you talk a lot about distribution. What about the balance between? I know that everyone's kind of heard this advice, and we want to save time to talk about current events, but briefly, there's lots of sound bites on this. You should be spending 20% of your time creating content and 80% promoting it, or you should be 1/3 of the time should be creating and 2/3 of the time being promoting it. How in these teams do you find that even with good strategy that people are just post and pray, or does the right team with the right strategy automatically have in mind the measurement and improvement of results because they budgeted for time, if not money, for promotion?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I don't know what the right percentage is. I think it's one of those things where, it's like, the posts that come out and say, the best time to blog is on Tuesdays at 10 o'clock, right? Yeah. All those kind of things. I think your mileage may vary for sure. I will tell you the numbers that sort of are burned into my forehead And these are sort of experiential numbers from brands that we've worked with, not necessarily prescriptions for you, is 25, 25, 50, right? So we have, and it's just easy to remember for me too. So it's 25 on creation, 25, and this is time, budget, however you want to allocate it. 25 creation, 25 production, 50 on activation and promotion or distribution.
Yeah.
And so what the key is there is treating our content, and this gets back to the operating model, is treating our content like with the same care and feeding that we do our product. Mm-hmm. I would argue that our content is something that we produce more of, we spend more on than pretty much anything else in the business. And so treating it with the same care and feeding that we do our products is what's paramount here. And so if we're creating a great blog, if we're creating a great resource center, if we're creating great assets, we should promote them and market them as much, maybe if not even more these days, and I know we'll get to this in a bit, than as we would, our products and services, right? A great blog, a great white paper, a great research piece of original research. You just did this, right? With your wonderful research on the state of blogging.
Oh yeah.
Which is an amazing piece.
Thank you.
You not only sort of put paid behind that, but you put organic behind that. You put a regular marketing campaign behind that original research study because it's that important. And that's the kind of thing that often doesn't happen. We're often darkening the door of the media people or, the marketing director saying, hey, can I have a little bit of budget for some boosted social on this piece because we really, really like it, or that kind of thing. And it just needs to be reviewed, sort of more holistically. I couldn't agree more that it's important.
Yeah. I've, as a marketing nerd, I've actually tried to measure the percentages of how much time I put into creation and promotion. And it's really hard to do. It's always an abstract question. Because if I'm doing keyword research, what is that? Is that
right?
Is that creating content or promoting it? Or if I'm reaching out to a contributor to get an influencer to quote on something, is that creation or promotion? There's too much gray area to take that advice literally. But as a guideline, your point, excellent. Spend as much time.
Here's one way, just one suggestion. Look at it as a product and start to separate it by product management versus product marketing, right?
Sure. Yeah.
What are you doing as a product management activity, which is really building the product and the viability of that product, and then the product marketing, which is of course, distribution and promotion of that product.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it because it's produced. It is a product. You're producing something. Okay, we're going to save at least 8 or 10 minutes here for the elephant in the room, coronavirus, how to do marketing, and should we be doing marketing? Massive, interesting questions, important questions for us right now. Can't avoid it. But first, very briefly, Stephanie Ray asks, what's the criteria for balance between paid and organic promotion? Thank you for your question, Stephanie. I'll say briefly that it really might depend on the piece because there are things where organic just won't work very well and paid might work beautifully. There's other things where paid might be a big challenge. I think it comes down often to the topic or the format. But what do you think, Robert? Do you have any thoughts about just generally speaking? We know that paid is often an underinvestment. What do you think?
I mean, it's a little bit like what we were just talking about with the balance of how much time and effort and money do you put into creation and production, right? So it's a very similar thing here, which is basically when we think about the marketing mix of organic versus the marketing mix of paid promotion, what's the right mix? And the right mix is basically dependent upon your goals. And I think probably, and you're much more of an expert on this than I am. I think it comes down to a little bit of time, right? So organic sort of, and I know there are definitely sort of, exceptions to this rule, but as a general rule, organic's going to take a little more time to surface, whereas paid promotion is, I need this thing at the top of the list immediately and aware of this. So what you're paying for is a compression of time. That's where the sort of, calculus comes in of where I'm going to put money. I'll give you a great example of this. One of the award winners from Content Marketing Institute's Content Marketing Awards was Monster.com and their amazing publication, their Career Advice Center, which is pretty much all organic. And they really focus in on making that stuff organic, optimized, because the way they look at it is the traffic, the organic traffic and conversions they get is, quite frankly, the antidote to all of the stuff they're putting into paid media. So they look at that balance as sort of the focus in on what they're doing on their career advice center. But now they've built in the model where they can see what organic traffic looks like versus what paid traffic looks like. And they know how much they're spending on each. In other words, they can see the delta. Well, that delta gives them the ability to just start to go promoting some of the content on Career Advice Center because they can manage within that delta and still make the traffic profitable.
Tassin Kazi asks, how do we ensure the quality of content within the team? Any tools for ensuring quality? Also, how can quality be tied to metrics, considering quality can be so subjective?
Yeah. You want to have that one, or shall I take a shot at it?
Here's a poorly formed, not very well considered answer. I talked to somebody recently. How's that for setting expectations? I talked to someone recently who said that the value of attention is something like 1 cent. This is US. 1 cent per minute per visitor or per viewer. Now, if you think about content, how hard it's working for you, as in average time on page multiplied by the number of page views, or for video, the average duration multiplied by number of views, you probably can get to metrics across formats that will give you a sense for how engaging that content is for an audience, at least in visibility. But really, the quality is probably better when connected to the conversion potential of that piece of content. What is the conversion rate from it? Visitors who read this article are how likely to download the ebook or subscribe to the newsletter, or is this page a page on the user flow, a popular page on the way to becoming a lead? So quality equals ability to persuade. So if you think of it that way, then the best tool for that is analytics.
That's a version of that is my answer as well, because whenever quality comes up, I always say, well, what does quality mean? Because it's different for different people, right? For a Hollywood producer, quality is how many butts did I put into the seat?
Right.
And quite frankly, so I'll do anything to get there, right? I'll make a show about the Kardashians, or I'll make some, crappy thing, but it's very popular and it puts butts in the seat. For an auteur, for a director, for some, artist director, it may be, quite frankly, the quality for a very niche audience and how many awards it wins, or how many, quite frankly, people did it, affect. And then for someone else, an educator, for example, it might be, did I actually teach the thing successfully? Quality is such a subjective thing. So I always get to what you just said, which is persuasion. I sort of put it into the category of, did they do what I want them to do on the other side of it, right? Did they click? Did they subscribe? Did they get educated and say they got educated? Did they actually get the effect that I intended? And that's what defines quality. And all of that can be measured with varying tools, whether it's something qualitative like a poll or a survey or a 5-star rating on how well did this content meet your needs, to everything from conversion rates to SEO results, et cetera. All of the tools sort of combined can help you measure, are we increasing over time the quality of our content because we're having people do more things?
Yeah. I think quality is probably more about the mousetrap than the cheese. We've all seen content that has massive traffic and no business impact.
Right, exactly. I would much rather have 1,000 people visit my site every month and 500 do something than 10,000 visit my site and 200 of them do something.
Yeah, exactly. That's because what matters to the company.
Yep.
Well, we've got a few minutes left. There's a global pandemic.
Is there? I hadn't heard.
1.4 billion people are on some sort of lockdown. Should we be marketing? Should marketers market? Are we hitting the pause button on, this is, or what's working in marketing?
Yeah. Here's what I've been saying to clients. We've been having lots of discussions with our consulting clients, and here's what we've been saying basically, which is, And this, I don't mean this to sound self-serving, but it's going to sound self-serving, which is it's time to lean into content marketing for sure. In other words, developing content that is valuable and useful and inspirational and educational for your customer. It's time to lean into that as opposed to promotion to the extent that you want to say anything. But as you start leaning into that thought leadership, that education, that inspiration, just be mindful that it's also not the time to educate them on the things that you've maybe classically been educating them on.
Agreed.
Like I talked to a financial services company just this morning, in fact, and I said, now's not the time to send out that white paper that talks about how to balance your 401k portfolio better. Just not the time for that.
No,
right? For the travel agency, it's not the time to tell us how to use your frequent flyer miles, right? It's just not the time for that. So think about what it is. And this gets to that operating model again. How quickly can you pivot? What's in the pipeline of content? And how can you start switching it up to be contextual versus what do you want to teach people now, today? And I think that's, we're starting to hear a lot of people pivot this way and really move into content. And I think, yes, it's okay to teach. Yes, it's okay. It's always okay to deliver value. The question is, what value are you delivering?
I saw a tweet that was responded to with the simple words, "This is tone deaf right now."
Yeah.
Tone deaf as in you are ignoring the big issue. Like, why are you doing self-promotion? There's a health and economic crisis in the world. Anything that you do, I think, through email and through social has that risk of getting blowback. I don't think that a little bit of negative feedback should stop us. But we need to be sensitive in that channel. And I agree 1000%. If you're very concerned, here's something I've been explaining to people. If you're very concerned about your marketing being poorly received right now because it's insensitive, of course it is. It's been in production for weeks and it's finally ready to go live. One thing that you can always do that would never be perceived as insensitive is to improve not your content marketing content, but your sales pages, your website, your homepage, your product pages, your service pages, doing a better job of search optimizing the platform, right? Every page is either content marketing content, it's the help, or it's the sales content, the hype, right? We're teaching or we're selling. The pages that sell, this is a great time to go back and refocus your website, rewrite sales pages, relaunch your website, better optimize your homepage. Use the analytics, check to see if your navigation is performing well. Check your calls to action throughout your site. Like, add Hotjar, add tools, use Semrush to get the SEO writing assistant to compare your top sales pages with your competitors' top sales pages. Even if you want to pause your content marketing, there's still lots of important marketing we can all do by building better the core of our sites that sell the thing that we do, the product and service pages, the home pages. I can't imagine anybody saying, "Oh, there's a terrible time to update your homepage." Why would that never? It's
right?
never. I woke up this morning and I wrote 2.5 paragraphs of sales content for a service page. I will get value from that for many years, long after this epidemic is over.
That's right. Great. It's a great point.
But yeah, we got content that maybe, are you seeing people put anything on hold?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Especially this week and last week, right? Where in many ways, I think the last couple of, certainly last week and perhaps this week as well, I think things are changing and fluid as we even speak. I think what I've seen a lot of is saying, okay, let's take a moment because our audience or our customers, or quite frankly, the world is in a bit of a readjustment right now. We're starting to figure out how to readjust our work lives. We're trying to figure out how to adjust our personal lives. We're trying to so there's a lot of angst right now in the world that, quite frankly, is basically, maybe this is the week to not say anything, right? And so I think for varying businesses and varying industries, it'll be time to slowly fold that back in, fold some of that messaging back in. This webinar, notwithstanding, right? Us sitting here live and talking about content and content operations. Hopefully it's useful. Hopefully it's not, tone deaf into what the world is doing. And hopefully the audience out there is getting value out of it, in addition to dealing with all of the things that they have to deal with.
Well, in defense of this webinar, we're partly producing evergreen content that will be repurposed for years, as we should all be doing. And we gotta work. We gotta do our jobs, people. We are marketers, and we can't let everything stop. It's our jobs to keep helping our clients, to keep helping our brands. And there's a point at which, the show must go on. So I'm not sure that I'm in total agreement for people who think that we should just, stop all aspects of the economy for this. Like, if you can help someone, which is what a marketer does, do that. Please keep doing that. And, do so with empathy, do so with care, do so with sympathy. I'll say now what I say at the bottom of every email I send. Stay safe, people, and stay healthy.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Robert Rose.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is fun.
And thank you, Anton. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Semrush. Thank you, everyone, for attending. You will all be getting a recording of this live. Feel free to share it with anybody that you know that is on any team that has any kind of I almost wish I'd written down the time code for those moments when he dropped those nuggets. That editorial board to alignment with strategy, reduction of waste, measurement. What does a piece of content cost? If you got an extra, if you had a bunch of meetings canceled because of world events, go ahead and challenge yourself to measure the cost of your content. That's I'm going to go do that. And we'll see you next time. Keep an eye on this space for future webinars. Take care, everyone.